long-awaited unit where we connect with the audience. I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler that this is going to be a very short video. There's not a lot to this unit that I felt like we really needed to cover. I wanted to cover a few different things. You only have one quiz and the speech to give, no extra assignments or anything. So let's hop right in so I can get you out of here. When we use a personal narrative, we oftentimes, I use them a lot. Okay. I am one of those people when I am talking in class, I will use stories from my life to prove a point, or just to give context to who I am as a person, especially when we're teaching in a virtual setting, especially when um, students don't necessarily see me every day or even every week, depending on how much they come to class. Sometimes it's really nice if they can get to know me a little bit. So I often tell stories that are about me, but they are usually shaped to meet the needs of a given situation. Perfect example, my first ever year of teaching. It's a stressful year when you're a first year teacher, right? You've got to figure out kind of what your persona is. We've talked about persona before, we'll talk about it again. What your vibe's going to be in the classroom. Do you want to be the really strict teacher? Do you want to be the laid back teacher? Do you want to be somewhere in between? What are your rules going to be? So on. So I was telling a story about my dog. Now, for the life of me, I cannot remember why, but it did connect to what we were talking about in class that day. Sometimes my stories don't, but most of the time they do. My principal walked in to do an observation of me, and he said, I walked in and I was terrified that you had lost your dang mind. Like you were just telling a story about your dog randomly in the middle of the class. Now, it all worked out. We looped it back around. Everything was great, but it was shaped to meet the needs of the given situation. It, like I said before, it connects the speaker to the audience, makes the speaker more likable, credible, interested in others. It needs to be part of a bigger speech, okay? It can't be the whole thing. That's a different kind of speech. That's a different kind of public speaking. That's almost storytelling, which has its time and place, but most of the time, your public speaking has a point, and it can't just be one big or two big stories about you. It has to be fit within a bigger speech. You have to strike a balance between too much information and focus on the purpose of the speech. We've talked about how every public speaking occasion has a purpose, right? What's the purpose? How does the personal narrative that you're using fit in? And what details are necessary and what details are just added time? And then what details cross boundaries, like personal issues, racism, politics, religion, condescension, whining, lecturing, letting the story take over the whole speech. If I were to tell that story about my first observation, um, and just keep telling it, right? Like make it part of the whole thing, then it really would just be a video about me and not about this unit, okay? So you have to kind of strike a balance between all of those things. Before before a speech starts, right? We need to introduce the speech. Now, you take a pause before the speech starts. You take a breath. Before I sat down and hit record, I sat down with these slides. I remembered what I was supposed to say, kind of remembered the trajectory of things. Will I mess up? Yeah, I'll mess up. Okay, absolutely. I haven't really eaten, so my stomach's probably going to growl, things like that. But if you just pause, take a second, and then get a strong opening, that's 50% of the progress. If you look at Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, if you look at John F. Kennedy's speeches, if you look at LBJ's speeches, our most effective speakers immediately achieve their goals in the opening introductions of their speeches. Martin Luther King, they set a tone, they gain attention, and they immediately, as quickly as they can, connect the speaker to the audience. Now, let it be known, Lincoln, Kennedy, LBJ, those people had authority on their side, right? But you can see speakers every day do this, people that you don't necessarily know, right? Imagine as a speech starting up and the person's not really sure what they're doing, and they're fidgeting with their hands, they got their papers and they set down their papers and they're doing this and doing this. It is not going to work. You're going to lose that attention span. You're not establishing any sort of positive or authoritative tone. You're saying, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm frazzled. If you just take a second, good morning. How's everyone doing today? Let's get started, right? Just anything. Effectively introducing your piece is always better than maybe being the level of realistic nervous that you are. Never do these things in a speech. Never do these things in a speech. I always have things that not to do in an essay, right? Don't tell me I think, I feel, I don't care what you think and feel. I need you to know, right? In an argumentative essay. Um, don't assume that I know who you are and what you're doing, right? In a speech, don't apologize. Sorry for taking up so much of your time. No, no, no. Again, you're giving away tone, you're giving away attention. Don't tell me how nervous you are. I'm already probably going to assume that you're nervous, and that's okay, right? If you're speaking and you're up in front of a group of people, the most common fear of people is speaking in public. Jerry Seinfeld has a joke. I don't know if I've said this in a previous video. Apologies if I have. That the number one fear among people is public speaking. Number two is death, which means that at a funeral, most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. We all assume that someone who is up in a public setting speaking is already nervous because we would be nervous, most of us, right? So you don't have to tell me that. Don't tell me that. Don't give up that ground. Don't close off your language or your body language. Don't sit there like this. Open your body up, right? Don't kind of talk, in little sentences and just sort of open yourself up. Be authoritative. Don't overact either, though, right? Don't be like, I'm here and I'm speaking and you love me. No, that gets tiring. Like that just straight up gets tiring. Do say hello in your introduction. Do thank people, establish why you're there, present your credentials, hook your audience, and prepare your audience for what they're going to hear. Again, do those things that establish the tone, establish your credibility, and get them engaged enough for the speech. Some different ways that you can introduce things. You can ask a question. I don't love this one. This is like a personal little parentheses for me. I don't love asking a question. I think it's overused. It's still effective if you're having trouble coming up with an introduction and then with an introductory hook. Questions always work. I don't love them just because they always sound to me like that old TV show Reading Rainbow. Like, have you ever wanted to go to the moon? Well, do I have a book for you? Like, they all sound like that to me. And that's probably cynical on my part because I've watched too many speeches and too many bad speeches and bad presentations and whatever. But it's there if you need it. You can present a surprising fact. You can offer a quote. Again, some of these are overused, but do what you think feels right in the moment. You can share an anecdote, give a real life example, bring up an event everyone is talking about, but most importantly, practice it. Okay, as you're practicing your speech and you're getting ready to give it on the flip grid, practice it first, okay? Practice your intro, try on a few different intros, see what feels right to you in the moment, what's going to make you most confident, and then go with that. Questions to ask for your speech. And again, this is as you're preparing it, not to ask the audience at the time. What events from your experience do you find yourself thinking about often, replaying in your mind, referring to in conversation? Why do these stand out in your memory? I always kind of call these dinner party stories, right? The one that you always tell that you know has a beginning, middle, and end, that is going to entertain, that you can use to prove a point, right? What events have helped you learn something new or important or prompted you to see things in a new way? Could your audience learn from these events as well? Can you go that step further to be like, this isn't a thing that just happened to me. Here's the bigger lesson. And then what events stand out in your memory as like the superlatives, right? The best day ever, the worst news you ever got, the kindest thing you ever did for me. Another one I love asking folks is what's the hardest time you ever laughed? I stole that from the Pete Holmes podcast, but it always gets a good answer. Sometimes these are stories that other people would like to hear about. You're going to be doing a narrative as part of your speech, right? So you're going to be telling me a personal story. As you're telling me this personal story, make sure it has a plot. a clear beginning, middle, and end. Make sure that I can tell who the people are in the story and not including too much detail like, oh, so my Aunt Sandra was there, and Aunt Sandra actually married my cousin Bill. It's their third marriage each. And they they were divorced separately and then they got together, and she has red hair and she loves Elvis. Oh my gosh, she loves it. Does any of that matter to the story? Maybe not, right? So only include those characters in the story. And again, these are real people, right? But only include those characters that are important to the story. Make sure I can tell the point of the story. What's the bigger theme here? Was it just to tell me an entertaining story, or did you have some sort of like bigger idea? And Reese, we always want to make sure that we're resonating with the listener. The listener is me. I'm good with whatever you put down, so you don't have to research me, really. But if you were talking to a group of people and you were using a personal narrative, you may want to research what the makeup of that um, audience was going to be. Okay. And we've talked about that before, managing audience expectations, doing a little bit of research on the audience ahead of time to make sure that you're hitting them in the right way. Some ways to manage nerves. Okay. And again, we all have nerves. Everyone who's watching you give a speech is going to assume that you're nervous, right? It's just one of those things, like the baseline level. Distractions are powerful for good or bad, right? You can have a pen like this or a fidget or some kind. Again, just as long as it's not distracting. Stress is a normal response. It's a normal physiological response. Again, you're putting your body and your brain into a thing that it's not necessarily equipped to do all the time. So you can reinforce yourself, right? You can self-reinforce and be like, I'm gonna do a great job today. Like, no one's gonna care if I mess up a word, no one's gonna care if I do this. They're gonna care about the message, they're gonna care about being entertained and informed, and that's what I'm gonna do. Find something neutral to think about that has nothing to do with the speech. When I was on the chase, when I was on the game show, I was getting really nervous. The one thing I was really getting nervous about was doing just horribly, like getting none of the questions right. And so I kind of reframed it as the odds that I got here, and they would give me no questions that I know, are so small. Let's think about something else instead, right? So it was reinforcing and doing all of that sort of stuff at the same time. You do have a quiz on managing nerves. Um, and you do have a quiz on managing nerves in the content. So your unit 3 speech, you will deliver and develop a personal narrative. You'll be responsible for covering certain content and demonstrating specific speaking skills you've learned in this unit, which we just talked about. Your speech must be between 3 and 5 minutes. I don't necessarily care about the timing, just include all of this stuff. You need to have an engaging, effective introduction, the narrative plot, the theme, relevance to the audience, and characters like we just talked about. Make sure that you're kind of keeping eye contact with the camera as much as possible. Make sure that you keep a conversational tone, and that's pretty much it for you sitting at home and doing that. Okay, no document this week. Do the quiz, do the Flipgrid speech, and have a wonderful time. And I'll see you next time for Unit 4.